Amazing. And now, speaking of which, I think it's a good segue. Let's deal with Millie Weaver, because there's been an update since our last stream, which was the disclosure of the secret indictments revealing what the charges were, what it seems to have stemmed from. I guess first things first, for anybody who doesn't know, Millie Weaver is a journalist, independent journalist. She does contract work for InfoWars. I was corrected on that. So she's not employed by InfoWars, but does contract work for them. Apparently the day that she was releasing her documentary called Shadowgate, she was arrested. She recorded the incident to say that it went viral, and all coverage of it went viral. I think people were very interested in the story because people were making connections that you can't blame them for making, even if some of them panned out to be more or less on target. She is arrested, brought to jail Friday afternoon. In jail, with her husband until Monday morning. Apparently, Department of Child Protective Services got involved on the Monday. The secret indictment, which was released, showed that she was being arrested or charged with robbery because of an incident where she took her mother's cell phone and apparently pushed her mother to the ground because her mother was apparently recording conversations of her husband and her brother berating her. Her mother had come to live with them during the My Sharona Cyrus Schmendrick. So I guess, and now we see that the charges had nothing to do with burglary or theft of documents that were featured in the documentary. Totally unrelated. Coincidentally, it took a month to execute the warrant, and it was executed the day that she tweeted she was releasing the documentary. We'll get into that. First things first. Secret indictment is a scary word for sealed indictment. All indictments are sealed or are private, right?
Kind of. So in other words, the grand jury proceedings are secret, but indictments are sometimes not sealed. It depends on the local jurisdiction as to how often they're sealed. So so on that aspect, the overarching view, I still see the cases like Julian Assange. It's just the first charges against Julian Assange, which were personal, meant to discredit him, meant to set him up for future extradition for future charges if they were able to get him through. And I see this is one of the most absurd examples of overcharging ever. Essentially what they've charged her with is assault during a robbery. This is a charge limited that's intended for people who are carjacking, for people who are robbing people in a bank, robbing people in their home. I have never seen someone in a family dispute be charged with assault during a robbery. It is one of the dumbest charges I've ever seen. So it's clear, it's extreme overcharging. The anomalies with the case include, first and foremost, that the purported victim filed an affidavit, according to her own words, of non-prosecution and asked that no prosecution go forward. I've never seen that.
And stop there. In fairness, I think from that comment that she had only filed the affidavit for non-prosecution after Millie was arrested. So I think the timing on that might be relevant. Whereas I thought she had done it back in April. It seems that she might have only done it on the weekend where she was arrested.
Well, it appears to be two things. She told them back in April to drop it, and then it was just a family misunderstanding. She then accelerated to an affidavit once she realized they had gone forward. So they had no cooperation from her. She had told them not to go forward. There's two sides of the story, according to police reports. The other side of the story is that she has issues, and that she'd always had issues, and that was the other side. And once you hear the other side say, look, she has issues, and these issues lead to her to make up some stories that aren't accurate. And then she tells you several days later, don't bring the charges. I've never seen them bring charges in that case, least of all felony charges, that are intended for actual crimes, not family disputes. So there's that aspect. So part one is you have no victim. That's unheard of for the most part. Very, very rare. Second, you have an incredible time delay that has been completely unexplained. This happened in April. They get an indictment around that time. Then they get a warrant in June or July.
Yeah, July 20.
July 20th is when it's formally issued. They could have got it long before then. So none of that makes sense. Why they need an arrest warrant doesn't make sense. This is a summons case. Then they do it right when she's releasing the film. That is very peculiar timing. And then they hold her over the weekend to do the shock and awe routine, which is an abusive tactic that they rarely use. That people say it's common. It's not common. It's only used in politically motivated cases where they want to coerce people.
And this is the dialogue that's happening. Everybody's saying, well, all indictments are sealed, or secret indictments are necessarily secret. They do this all the time. It's overcharging as a prosecutorial strategy, so it makes them easier to get a plea of guilty to a lesser charge. I mean, people have these. Everybody has these sort of.
But
same
most of
back
that's
and forth.
wrong. Most of that's wrong. Is unfortunate. I mean, for example, with indictments are not always sealed. Sometimes, particularly at a local level, that's not universal. Now, I don't know the particular protocols in Portage County, Ohio. So what I had heard from people up there was that was not common, particularly in these kind of cases. I mean, usually sealed indictments are for high-profile cases where someone's going to flee, or as a mob case, or as a witness tampering case, things like that. That's the biggest anomaly, is that any charges are being brought at all, given there's no complainant and given the facts are in dispute, and that this appears to be a very minor family dispute.
So and to push back on that, because I'm going to bring up a comment from Jacob Walls. He says you can't drop a domestic case, and with good reason. Now,
not like this. That's incorrect. That's only when there's a dispute between. I've done tons of these. I was on the front line of doing domestic violence and abuse cases from the time that the order of protection laws were passed in 2000, 2001, 2002 throughout Tennessee. So I'm intimately well aware of what charges they tend to bring and don't bring. Had to study national protocols in other states for that purpose and that reason. And in that context, this is a dispute between the only ones where they're required to arrest are certain states between a husband and wife. It is not the case where there's a family. Any family member does not create this. If it did, they'd be locking up thousands of people every day in Portage County, Ohio. I guarantee you. So and that's true anywhere in the country. People get into fights and arguments all the time, including where something physical happens. And it wasn't clear. What she said is that she got pushed down. That's not the kind of thing they're looking for at domestic violence. That they're looking for, things like escalating physical violence, someone that's bigger and stronger against someone smaller. They not something like this where it could have easily been that she fell trying to hold her phone. I mean, so that's just problematic, where you don't really know for sure what precisely happened. Even it's not mandatory that they issue an arrest. And I would say to those people that say it's mandatory, well, why didn't it happen in April then?
Well, and that's the biggest thing, is that everybody citing the domestic violence as, these things have to be taken seriously. Police don't mess around with them because they always escalate, or they often escalate, and that's why they have to be treated so seriously. If that's the case, you don't walk away the day of after having done your police report, concluding that you don't necessarily trust everything the brother's saying, who said that the mother lost her cell phone 2 days earlier, but they have text messages, whatever. You don't walk away the day of, and then to come back with the battering ram, quite literally, 5 months later. So that explanation rings hollow to me. I appreciate the domestic violence element to it, but that's usually interspousal, and in a situation where it's usually much more pronounced than a mother coming to stay with you and having a squabble that results in her, getting pushed or falling to the ground, and nothing comes of it the day of. If there's such a risk, you don't leave without doing anything the day of.
Yeah, I mean, my neighbors used to fight each other every day. They used to fight. It was like every other night they'd be beating each other up in the front yard. And so this is not normal to bring a prosecution in this case. And I know that part of Ohio, those kind of disputes are not uncommon. And so the idea that this is somehow normal criminal procedure is just not the case by any evidence I know. So so that's part one, is it's highly unusual that any charges are being brought when there's no victim, when there's a long time delay, and it's a sealed indictment, and that the charges are over prosecuted. Then you have the peculiarity of the timing, which doesn't make sense to me. So there's that part. I mean, the senator from Delaware, who helped put Biden's name in nomination, admitted to hitting his wife years ago. Nothing ever happened to him. That's just one example of many that I could point to. So and then you have the prosecutor, long-standing Democratic, well-connected political prosecutor, sits on the Organized Crime Commission in Ohio. I always tell people to pay attention to those, because look at what charges somehow don't get brought against high-ranking known organized crime officials in a state. That tells you something about those people operating on that commission. I'll leave it at that. Won't go into further detail. Let people figure it out on their own accord. So it's, in my view, however it's being done, it's either personally motivated or politically motivated. This is not being handled like a traditional case. It's not being charged like a traditional case. It's not everything about it, from the timing of it, from the fact they went forward at all, from the fact of what charges were brought, from the fact they did a weekend hold. All of it is bogus. And to give some example of that, it appears that they really thought they were going to be able to grab her kids. The court's reaction to this was twofold. One was to release her on her own recognizance, which tells you the court's looking at this wondering, why exactly are we here? Because you don't do weekend holds and sealed indictments and surprise arrest warrants for cases that they release the person on their own recognizance without having to put a penny of bail cash in. And they immediately release her kids right back to her, which tells you that DCS doesn't believe this is in fact normally they would almost always hold the kids in a context like this. They didn't, which tells you they believe that what is there. Those are two institutions, DCS and the courts, that are familiar with the norm. And they're reacting to this case like it has been greatly overstated by the way in which the decisions that they have made. So my view is it's politically motivated. I don't know if it's related to the film or not. They may have been more worried. Someone may have been more worried about what was in that film than turned out it was in the film. Who knows? But it smacks of what they did to Julian Assange. It smacks of what they've done to a lot of whistleblowers. Often whistleblowers are targeted, but they're targeted for some other activity other than their whistleblowing. In fact, as we'll talk about later, my view of the Bannon prosecution is similar in this respect.
Don't get ahead of us, Robert. Hold on, because that I'm going to have some questions, and I know other people are going to as well. Viva Fry, there was also the oddity that the officer did not show up prepared to arrest both listed on the warrant, had to call for transport. Yeah, I mean, another thing, I've never done this before, but do they not have to come with the warrant? Like, could she not have refused to go with them in the absence of actually seeing the warrant?
So for most people, to give you a background, when you have someone with no criminal history with a case like this, very light, somebody fell down and says they got pushed. That's it. No other violent consequence. It's months old. The norm is you just give him an appearance ticket to well, that's what they call it in New York. A summons is what they call it in most places. And a sheriff would just show up, give him a summons, say, hey, you got to show up in court in a week or two. That's the norm. So doing an arrest at all is abnormal. Doing an arrest of everybody is abnormal. Doing it so that you can have a weekend hold where they can't get bail is completely abnormal in a case like this. And him showing up without either the warrant or knowing what it's even about is all unusual. So that means someone accelerated it and said, hey, go pick this up. We have an old warrant on it, without him even telling him what the warrant was or giving him a copy of it. That's another sign. And we'll talk about this in the Bannon case later. The most important thing I teach young lawyers or other people trying to study a criminal case is don't focus on what's in the indictment or what facts you know. Look at what's not there that should be there, because that will tell you a much bigger story. So here, the fact that he picked her up on a Friday, didn't have the warrant, didn't know who was supposed to be picked up, didn't even know what the warrant was about when the warrant was months old, that tells you a lot. That tells you somebody called him up and said, oh, we got a warrant. We need someone picked up. We don't have the warrant. Go pick her up right now. Why the rush? So something was AWOL. And is it a coincidence that that's when she was releasing the film? I have a hard time believing that. So it's possible. I just don't see it as more probable than not at this stage of the case.
I say that there are some coincidences that are just too coincidental to be coincidences, and we call them that because you don't have any definitive evidence to prove it. But you will not be able to credibly blame someone for drawing connections because, the timing is just too coincidental to be a coincidence. And what was I about to say? No, and so the question is it a local cop who knows who Millie has done work for and wants to stick it to anything InfoWars related? Or is it politically motivated? Is it just a system gone haywire? I've sort of written off the last option because even from the link that someone sent me of the recent indictments in and I'm saying portage just because I'm from French Canada, but portage. Even based on the first page of that link, because I couldn't get to the other ones, they were all pretty serious. They involved weapons. They involved drugs. They involved, like, I'd say, more serious things than what was known in this case, which was people during a lockdown fighting with their mother who came to stay with them from California. I mean, they involved more serious things. So I've sort of come to grips with the fact that it's not par for the course. There is something else going on here. The only question is it just an overzealous prosecutor trying to make a name for himself? Or, other stuff which we cannot substantiate. But I think people should just know that it's not, there's nothing about it that looks normal, and trying to normalize it, I think it might be a sign of the times as well as relates to what people think of the prosecutorial process. But it doesn't look normal. Nothing about it looks normal.
And my instinct would be it's someone in the prosecutor's office because that's who went to the grand jury to get the indictment. And so that and I would say a typical state prosecutor, particularly in a county like that, where you saw what their docket usually is made up of, when they see a case like this, their normal reaction is going to be, "Why am I wasting my time on this? I've got serious abuse cases. I've got serious violence cases. I've got serious drug crimes. I got organized crime activity. I got gang activity. This is what I'm supposed to." And I'm sure a lot of that domestic issues spiked that are much more consequential during the lockdown. So that's going to be there. And they're like, hold on a second. A mother said she fell down, says it was by the point the prosecutor had it, according to the mother's word, they already knew the mother had retracted and said it was just a misunderstanding. I'm going to bring a felony indictment on this.
I read an article in Cleveland. I didn't actually see the police report, but it sounded like it might have been an overzealous police officer also, was like investigating this the day it happened, like it was the crime of the century. Going out back with the brother. Why aren't there any footprints in the mud? If you say you came back here with the phone, I mean, to me, I've never been in law enforcement, and I've talked about this with Nate, and he feels a little differently. To me, this would have been like, hey guys, it's stressful times. Everyone forget about it and move on. It would not be like, if that's how it ended, coming back 5 months later with this. And Scuba Steve says Barnes is correct. The tactics used in this case is highly unusual. Great job on your show. Thank you very much. Yeah, so it is. I mean, the good news, I guess, is she was let out, got her kids back the same day, had dinner with her family. She probably will never let her mother back in the house again. Some people were floating the theory that this was all staged between her and her mother to promote the movie. Never will I believe that. Until
I can tell you, zero chance of that. Nobody risks going to prison to promote a movie. Not only that would mean she had the coordination of the prosecutor's office, the Democratic prosecutor's office, and the coordination of the police. Sorry, folks. The unusual part here is what the prosecutors and the police are doing, not what anyone else is doing. So there's no truth or validity to that.
Default username says, how can a warrant be served 30 days after issuance? Isn't the address and date time of validity firmly set when a warrant is signed by the judge? Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. Does the warrant not expire if not used?
It all varies. So a lot of arrest warrants, at least in the federal system, arrest warrants never expire. So it depends on the local jurisdiction as to whether they may have such a rule there. I'm unaware of it. But normally an arrest warrant is outstanding forever.
All right. I think this is going to be a good segue, unless we have anything more to add on Millie.
Nope.
We'll see what happens. Next up, I mean, we're going to see if they actually continue to pursue the charges. They could, if they drop them, I guess that's a good question. If the police say, we're not prosecuting this anymore, how do we find out? How does that go in terms of a process?
Oh, they just drop it. And some smart prosecutors should, but we'll see. It may have been a preventative, like let's operate. What I like to do is operate from hypotheticals. Not like the DC Court of Appeals, but
yeah,
the hypothetical.
It's a dirty word on this channel now.
Exactly. But not like but more like when you're doing a trial defense, you have to say, okay, let's assume possibility X. Let's assume that's what happened. How would it flow out? What evidence would we look for? Because you have to do that when you're trying to prepare for any defense. And in this context, if it may have been, let's say it was politically motivated, they're worried about something showing up in the film that maybe did not show up. If that's the case, then they may drop the charges because their fears were not realized. If, on the other hand, this was, we're going to politically smear this person, period, and where we've pre-committed to following through on it, I would say the reaction of DCS and the reaction of the local court system is a warning sign to the prosecutors and the police, because they're saying this is not very serious and why are you wasting our time? By the terms of bail that she got, very low, 20 grand if she just decides to abscond, no cash at all. And there's a lot of reasons why those systems almost always require cash bail. Take a look at who contributes to prosecutors and judges getting elected in small counties and counties across the country. You'll understand why they require bail for pretty much everybody. Or watch a Ray Donovan season, the season from New York, where bail is the key component of what's taking place. To it to be basically zero bail in the state system, federal system, that's pretty normal. State system, that's very abnormal. And then the second part is for the DCS to walk away right away, when those people are always looking for excuses to grab kids 9 times out of 10. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the outcry, talking about the Showtime show Outcry. Both are huge signals that they're saying this has been way overstated. So it wouldn't surprise me if they drop it. If they're smart, they'll drop it. But you never know. How do you get a conviction when the mother gets up there and says it was a misunderstanding and she didn't want this to happen? How
Well,
do you get a
and
jury
not just that, I
conviction?
mean, thinking like a cynical lawyer, when the mother changes her story in the affidavit for non-prosecution to change what actually occurred, you not only have a non-cooperating witness, but you have one who's, call it a hostile witness.
Yeah, and who's your only source of claiming domestic violence or robbery occurred here?
Yeah, no, it's well, and I do wonder if they were surprised at the media outcry it got. I mean, once it gets on Rebel News and they've got a massive following, and then it got, everybody got interested because it had the ingredients of a movie, of a conspiracy movie. It blew up, and I think, yeah, if they have learned any lessons, they'll let it drop. But then, I've seen now people tend to double down on their mistakes instead of admitting them. So, speaking of which,
yeah, I'll just say briefly on that. That's because the whole system understates Alex Jones's audience. The size, scale, and scope of his audience is deeply misunderstood by people who want to caricature him or misunderstand him or criticize him. And you can criticize him if you want. That's your privilege or prerogative. But don't, as part of that process, pretend there aren't millions of people who are deeply loyal to him and see him as one of the true last standing independent members of the press, the last standing free press in America. So that's because that was entirely due to the fact that she appeared on his show. That's why that happens. And it was his audience that rallied to him. So he may not keep her on as an independent contractor. That's a different story for a different day. But his audience has extraordinary capabilities to mobilize behind anyone that they think is getting wrongly attacked by the system.
Well, they certainly mobilize. I mean, a shocking amount. I mean, I guess it's shocking to someone who's not involved in that world, but it was a surprising amount of people that mobilized and really got the word out there and kept it alive throughout the weekend.